Okay, good day, people. So, if you've been following, To Be Serious has posted up a new series sort of investigating in an open question style format the nature of consciousness, and she's started talking about, how do people address the really hard problem of, to what extent can we talk intelligently about how what we take to be our contemporary conscious experience of contemplating, of wishing, and of all the volitions and intentions that we have, and how did that somehow either emerge from matter, or how did matter come to possess this property? I mean, what sense are we to make of it? Is it just sheerly epiphenomenal? Raising a whole series of questions. And I really enjoyed the response that Conference Report had given it, Who Put the Con in Consciousness. I think that's really, I guess from my perspective, the right way to come at it, right? To understand knowing with, right? This conscious. Yeah, I think that to break down the word a little bit and to chase it down. And then the more that you think about it in terms of chasing down the roots, I guess I'm really inclined to say that the entire area would need to be sort of overhauled in terms of some layered terminology where you'd want to be able to differentiate something like sentience from awareness, from and how they're related to the domain of feeling, and then how those are related to what we're going to call consciousness, and then ultimately self-consciousness. Because I think there is a big difference between consciousness and self-consciousness, and so much of what we're concerned with when we talk about consciousness is really self-consciousness. So, okay, one way to get at it would be to say that there is an irritability to cell membranes. There's an irritability to life itself. And that irritability is some kind of sensate awareness of the larger environment. So there has to be some kind of recognition of, now it doesn't have to be conscious, and again, it's not yet conscious, but there is a sensate discrimination between one kind of environment and another kind of environment. Now, it need not position itself, right? The irritability of the cell need not postulate and, quotes, comprehend itself as being irritated, but the irritation itself is a motivating factor that changes its relation state to the immediately existing environment. And so various forms of irritability are kinds of awareness just at the level of life that move things toward or against various, I guess, nutrient gradients, again, toward those, or against, various hostile or damaging environments, right? There's some sort of register of those. Okay. I guess by the time you get to what we're going to call consciousness, okay, so I think it's going to be probably the most, okay, well, you're going to have to do the feeling before you get to there. I think the irritability, that feature of sensate awareness of irritability, I think that slowly, with sophisticated developments of neurophysiological apparatus, this becomes an object for the next level of the nervous system. So you want to see the nervous system building on top of itself and on top of itself, and in various ways it takes the previous organism-environment relationship as its object at a different level of abstraction. So instead of just the organism being irritated by immediate sensory conditions and then moving in response to those, that somehow accommodates for its own, I guess, again, it's prolonged reaction to those things, right? How do you say this? That the emotions emerge as, I guess, second order states on top of awareness states. And they emotions are largely like living evaluations that don't yet postulate the person as having the emotion. So there's a difference between, well, I see some of this gets really complicated too, because there are certain kinds of emotions that can only come to be the emotions they are given self-reflexive consciousness, and so we're not even there yet. So there seems to be lots of levels where once the level of awareness state gets, I guess, appropriated and descended upon by the subsequent neurological development, it gets not wholly changed. I mean, it still has some of its integrity, but it gets reappropriated and subject to new dynamics that come from the kind of reflexive interactivity that's being provided there. So you move from this irritability to sensate awareness to various kinds of emotional states, which are evaluative responses at a meta level to those awarenesses. Then slowly you start to get something like consciousness. Okay, now from my perspective, consciousness, at the very least, you're going to have sophisticated modes of internal memory and of some form of imagination and of an increasingly elongated inner representational apparatus that allows you to, in a different rate of change. See, I think all reality is changing. Okay, all reality is changing. And when I was younger, I believed that something had to remain unchanging in order for the change to be registered. I think the older I got, the more I realized that you simply need differing rates of change, and differing rates of change intersect in such a way that clearings can be made possible where objects appear. See, it is kind of an interesting question to get at. How does one get out of endlessly like dense installment in organic and vegetative process to this delayed contemplative open space where one seems to be able to entertain thoughts that are occurring in a sort of space-time realm about this other stuff. And it's as if the words allow the reality to sit still long enough to contemplate it at various ways. And yet there's another sense of it. I mean, reality is just an absolute raging torrent river. I mean, but thought makes it sit still and calm down and makes it traversable in various ways. Okay, I guess the issue would be that consciousness, it doesn't have to do with, and it's grounded upon feelings and it's grounded upon awareness, but it has to do with the kinds of memory and elongated thought space that integrates memory and imagination that allows an organism to, I guess, be aware of rough forms of immediate situations. And so rather than just an awareness of the immediate, like literally like what's touching you around you, you're now going to need various distant senses. And see, some of it's already starting to break down because I'm failing to even get to where I want to get to, which is that I think consciousness really has to do with otherness. And without addressing the issue of otherness, people will never, ever, ever understand consciousness. And part of the problem is that we don't really understand the degree to which other creatures are subject to the kind of otherization that we are. And this has a lot to do with theory of mind. Like if you follow work on theory of mind, and you're going to deal with orders of intentionality, right? So when they're talking about orders of intentionality, and it's spelled with an S, not a T, so not the phenomenological notion of intentionality, but the analytic tradition of intentionality where you have a belief state, and that's first order intentionality. And second order intentionality would be, I have a belief state about another person's belief state. And then third order would be, I have a belief about their belief about my belief, right? We get to these multiple orders of intentionality, right? evolutionary biologist Robin Dunbar will suggest that there, are at least 3 to 4 within human culture that make science and religion possible, and that people with autism or people who have uh, serious disabilities, they really struggle with even second or third order intentionality. And this also happens developmentally. Children up until around age 2 or 3, they don't make very convincing liars, partly because they don't seem to realize that other people can have false beliefs. They don't give adequate subjective status to their own beliefs. But as development is occurring, something like the other infiltrates into the deepest recesses of one's consciousness, such that self-consciousness becomes possible. Embarrassment, shame, guilt, and remorse. The feeling that one is naked. There's so many sensibilities that come from. It's partly the brain, and the new brain, the sort of frontal cortex, I guess, has made an environment of all of the prior brain in some odd way, and it easily confuses itself because of its capacity for inner representation. But I think the more general point is that it's through others that we become ourselves, that without being plunged into radical ulteriority, right? That there's a total otherness that gets ripped upon you. You sort of get divided open, and this gets injected into you in so many ways. We become some function of those others, and in particular the language. That language is a forcing bed for self-consciousness, that you couldn't have the ongoing awareness of self without the distance to get from yourself in order to come back to yourself. And so language is that other that slides into me and then allows me to gain the distance from myself to first see myself. I'm made into an other by the other that language is, and that other allows me to take a position other than myself to look at me, and yet somehow now puts me always at a distance from myself. Self-consciousness, it may be a kind of byproduct of communication forms, largely of literacy. And it doesn't mean that in a direct fashion, as you become literate, you become more self-reflexively, self-conscious. It's partly that. There's fascinating studies on gang membership and illiteracy, and there's really pretty interesting stuff on this. But I think that the more large point is that entire cultures have literacy as their structure, even where no pen and paper are involved. And once you're in one of these kinds of structured societies that has roads built according to the orderliness that only literacy provides, and it has stores designed and created with only the orderliness that can provide, and cell phones that have alphabetacy. Just there's countless ways that the alphabet is organized and structured the world. That has a shaping factor in consciousness. It's not just something that's occurring at the neurological level or at the brain level. I think the more that people are going to try to understand consciousness by reducing it to the brain and not seeing the larger phenomena of there's never been a brain in isolation. There's always been brains in the plural, and those brains have been subject to countless evolutionary forms where subsequent developmental structures, they overlay and then reinterpret and modify prior phenomena. They allow them something like an integrity, but they largely get covered over in the new developments.